Richten, so dass ich in den Wahrheitsleuten bin. Ich trag dir die Rotznase noch so lang, bis es leer wird. Sauflüge rein. Und geht kein Null.
On a quiet night in rural Germany, a young woman collapsed to her knees, her body already worn down by months of suffering. Candlelight flickered across the walls as prayers filled the room, repeated again and again, as if repetition alone could force something unseen to leave. Her voice, once soft and ordinary, now sounded strained, unfamiliar, almost hollow. This was not a secret ritual hidden from the world. It was recorded, approved, witnessed, and it happened not once, but 67 times. Her name was Anneliese Michel. Anneliese Michel's life did not fall apart all at once. It fractured slowly, almost quietly, in ways that were easy to explain away at first. In 1968, when she was just 16 years old, she experienced something she struggled to describe. Late at night while lying in bed, she felt a sudden heaviness press down on her chest. Her body froze. She was awake, fully aware, but unable to move or speak. The room felt distorted, as if the air itself had thickened. When it finally ended, she was left shaken, unsure whether it had been a dream or something far more unsettling. These episodes did not stop. They returned without warning, sometimes during the day, sometimes at night. With each one, Anneliese felt more disconnected from her own body. Time slipped away from her. Moments vanished from memory. Her family grew concerned, and soon she was taken to doctors in search of answers that would make sense of what was happening. Medical tests were conducted, and eventually Anneliese was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy. It was a condition known to cause seizures, altered states of consciousness, and strange sensory experiences. Medication was prescribed, and at first there was hope. The diagnosis gave her family something solid to hold on to, a scientific explanation in a world that was beginning to feel unstable. But as months passed, hope faded. The medication did not bring relief. Instead, Anneliese's experiences began to change in ways that no one expected. She reported hearing voices, low, threatening whispers that appeared when she was alone. At times, she claimed to smell something foul, like burning sulfur, even when nothing around her had changed. These sensations felt vivid and real, leaving her frightened and exhausted. More disturbing still was how she reacted to prayer. Anneliese had been raised in a deeply religious home. Faith had always been her comfort. But now when she tried to pray, the voices grew louder. Religious images caused her distress rather than peace. She described feeling intense fear when entering churches, a place that had once been familiar and safe. Doctors adjusted her treatment repeatedly, changing medications and increasing dosages. Each time the hope was the same, that this new approach would finally help. And each time the result was disappointment. Her condition did not improve. In some ways, it worsened. For Anneliese, the medical explanations began to feel incomplete. The symptoms no longer seemed random or physical. They felt targeted, personal, as if something unseen was responding directly to her faith. Slowly, an idea took hold in her mind, one that terrified her, yet somehow made sense of the chaos she was experiencing. She began to believe that what she was facing was not an illness at all. She believed it was something inside her, and once that belief took root, everything that followed would be shaped by it. For most of her life, faith had been Anneliese Michel's refuge. Prayer had once brought her comfort, and church had been a place of familiarity and routine. But as her condition worsened, that sense of safety began to disappear. What disturbed her most was not the seizures or the blackouts. It was the way her reactions to religious symbols had changed. The very things that once defined her world now filled her with dread. Anneliese began avoiding prayer whenever she could. When she tried to force herself to pray, she reported an overwhelming sense of panic. Her heart would race, her thoughts would scatter, and the voices she claimed to hear would grow louder, more aggressive, as if they were reacting to her words. Crosses, holy images, and religious texts no longer felt sacred to her. They felt threatening. Her family noticed the shift immediately. This was not how Anneliese had been raised. In their eyes, her fear of holy objects made no sense medically. To them, it felt symbolic, almost intentional. They struggled to understand how a neurological condition could cause such a specific and intense reaction to faith. Anneliese herself began to search for meaning in what was happening to her. She read religious material obsessively, looking for explanations that medicine had failed to provide. Slowly, she came to a terrifying conclusion. She believed she was being punished, that something had entered her, something that did not belong there, and it was reacting violently to anything sacred. She began speaking of multiple entities inside her, not one presence, but several. She claimed they spoke through her at different times, each with its own tone and intention. Sometimes her voice sounded strained and unfamiliar. At other moments, she appeared distant, as if she were no longer fully present. These episodes left her exhausted and frightened, but they also reinforced her belief that what she was experiencing could not be treated with medication alone. Doctors continued to insist on a medical explanation. They adjusted prescriptions and encouraged psychiatric care. From their perspective, Anneliese was suffering from a severe and complex condition that required long-term treatment. But to Anneliese and her family, these efforts felt ineffective, even dismissive. The symptoms continued. The fear deepened. Desperation began to replace patience. Anneliese started writing letters to local priests, carefully explaining her experiences. She described the voices, the fear, and the way religious symbols triggered intense reactions. She begged for spiritual help, convinced that medicine had failed her. Some priests responded with caution, advising continued medical care. Others refused to get involved at all, but Anneliese refused to stop asking. To her, the answer was becoming clear. What she was facing, she believed, was not an illness of the body or mind, but a battle for her soul. And once that belief settled in, the idea of an exorcism no longer felt extreme. It felt necessary. By the time Anneliese Michel turned 20, desperation had replaced hope. Years of medical treatment had brought no relief, only new prescriptions and unanswered questions. To Anneliese and her family, it felt as though doctors were treating symptoms without understanding their cause. Each failed attempt pushed them further away from medicine and closer to belief. It was during this period that Anneliese made a request few people ever dared to voice. She asked for an exorcism. At first, the response from the church was firm and unmistakable. No. Exorcism was not a ritual taken lightly. It was rare, controversial, and strictly regulated. The church required overwhelming evidence that a case could not be explained by medical or psychological means. In Anneliese's situation, doctors had already provided a diagnosis. From the church's perspective, that should have been the end of the discussion. But Anneliese refused to accept that answer. She continued to insist that medication was not helping, that it was, in fact, making things worse. She claimed the voices mocked her during prayer and grew stronger when she sought medical help. According to those close to her, she appeared terrified of what would happen if the church turned its back on her. To Anneliese, refusal felt like abandonment. Her family stood by her. They watched her condition deteriorate day by day. They saw her fear, her exhaustion, and the way her personality seemed to slip away during episodes she could not control. To them, this no longer looked like illness alone. It looked like torment, and they believed that ignoring her pleas could cost her soul. Letters were written, meetings were requested, priests were approached again and again. Some listened politely, others dismissed the claims entirely. The idea of possession in modern Germany was uncomfortable, something many preferred not to acknowledge. Still, Anneliese persisted. Eventually, the pressure reached a breaking point. In 1975, after years of refusal and review, the church made a decision that would change everything. Permission for an exorcism was granted under strict conditions. 2 priests were assigned to carry out the ritual. Medical treatment, they insisted, was supposed to continue alongside it. But once the door was opened, it could not be easily closed. The exorcism ritual was not a single dramatic event. It was not meant to be repeated endlessly. Yet from the very first session, it became clear that this would not be a quick intervention. Anneliese's reactions were intense and disturbing. Those present believed they were witnessing something beyond the ordinary. What began as a spiritual measure soon became a routine. Prayers replaced treatment, rituals replaced rest, belief replaced caution, and slowly, without anyone fully realizing it, the balance between care and conviction began to disappear. The decision that was meant to help Anneliese may have sealed her fate. The first exorcism took place in September 1975, inside Anneliese Michel's family home. There were no crowds, no dramatic ceremony, just a small room, dimly lit, with religious objects placed carefully around the space. Two priests stood nearby, reading from the Roman ritual, their voices steady and controlled. What happened next would be described by witnesses as disturbing, not because of sudden violence, but because of how slowly it unfolded. As the prayers began, Annelise's behavior changed. Her body tensed, her breathing grew heavy, her voice strained, as if it were being pulled from deep inside her chest. Those present said she no longer sounded like herself. At times she whispered. At other moments, she spoke in tones that felt unfamiliar, even unsettling. The priest continued, believing resistance was expected. After all, they had been taught that whatever was tormenting her would not leave easily. The session lasted hours. When it ended, Anneliese was exhausted, barely able to stand. But instead of relief, she insisted that the ritual was only the beginning. Whatever she believed was inside her, she said, was still there. Watching her physical and emotional collapse, her family agreed to continue. The exorcisms became regular. Once a week turned into twice, sometimes more. Each session followed a similar pattern: prayers, commands, reactions, and then silence. All of it was recorded on audio tapes intended as documentation, but later becoming some of the most chilling evidence in the case. On those recordings, her voice could be heard shifting in pitch, tone, and intensity. Whether those changes were psychological or something else entirely became a matter of intense debate. As weeks passed, Annelise's condition visibly worsened. She stopped eating properly. She slept very little. Her body began to weaken. Yet the rituals did not slow down. Witnesses later described her kneeling for long periods, despite clear signs of pain and fatigue. Her knees became injured from the repeated strain. Still, she refused to stop. She believed the suffering was necessary, that enduring it was the only way to be freed. Doctors raised concerns. They warned that she was losing weight rapidly, that her body was under extreme stress. They urged medical intervention, but their voices were drowned out by conviction. To Anneliese and those closest to her, stopping the exorcisms felt dangerous, almost unthinkable. What was meant to be a temporary spiritual measure had become the center of her life. Over time, the line between care and ritual blurred completely. By the end of the year, the number of exorcisms had grown far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Each one left Anneliese weaker than the last. Still, she insisted on continuing. She believed that giving up would mean surrender, not just of her body, but of her soul. And as the rituals continued, something far more dangerous than anything unseen was taking hold. Her body was beginning to fail. By early 1976, the exorcisms had stopped being an intervention and had become a routine. What began as a desperate attempt to help Anneliese Michel now governed her entire existence. The rituals were performed again and again, often multiple times a week, each one draining what little strength she had left. Over 10 months, the number climbed steadily until it reached a chilling total: 67 exorcisms. With every session, Anneliese's physical condition deteriorated. She grew visibly weaker. Her movements slowed. Her voice became hoarse and strained. Those who saw her during this period described someone who looked exhausted beyond recovery. Yet despite the obvious decline, the rituals continued without pause. To the priest, resistance was expected. To the family, suffering was proof that the process was working. And to Anneliese herself, pain had taken on meaning. She reportedly believed her suffering was necessary, that it served a higher purpose. According to those close to her, she spoke of enduring torment so others might be spared. This belief strengthened her resolve and silenced her doubts. When medical professionals expressed concern, Anneliese resisted. She insisted that treatment would interfere with the spiritual battle she believed she was fighting. Doctors warned the family repeatedly. They pointed to her rapid weight loss, her lack of rest, her dangerously weakened state, but belief had hardened into certainty. Medical care was no longer the priority. The rituals were. As the months passed, Anneliese required assistance to move. Simple actions became exhausting. Still, the exorcisms did not stop. Audio recordings captured her weakened voice, the repetitive prayers, and the intensity of the sessions. Listening to them today, many are struck not by sudden outbursts, but by how prolonged and relentless the suffering sounds. There was no dramatic turning point, no moment where everything suddenly went wrong. Instead, it was a slow collapse. Each day, Anneliese's body struggled to keep up with demands placed upon it. She ate very little. She slept less. Her strength faded gradually, almost quietly. Those around her believed that endurance was part of the process, that relief would come if they simply continued. But relief never came. By the summer of 1976, Anneliese was barely able to stand. Her body had reached its limit, though no one was ready to acknowledge it. The rituals continued until there was nothing left for her body to give. On July 1st, 1976, Anneliese Michel died in her family's home. She was 23 years old. The cause was not mysterious. It was recorded clearly: severe malnutrition and dehydration. The nightmare had ended, but the questions were only beginning. Anneliese Michel's death did not fade quietly into obscurity. Almost immediately, questions began to surface, questions that could not be ignored. How could a young woman die in a modern country, surrounded by adults, medical professionals, and clergy, without anyone stopping what was happening? Authorities opened an investigation, and soon the case moved from the family home into a courtroom. The parents and the two priests who had conducted the exorcisms were charged with negligent homicide. What followed was one of the most unsettling trials Germany had seen. In court, the focus shifted from belief to responsibility. Prosecutors argued that Anneliese's death was preventable, that medical care should never have been abandoned, regardless of religious conviction. Doctors testified about her condition, explaining how malnutrition and exhaustion had weakened her body to the point where survival was no longer possible. Then the recordings were introduced. Audio tapes from the exorcisms were played before the court. The room fell silent as jurors listened to voices echoing from the past, strained, distorted, and clearly not the calm voice of a healthy young woman. The tapes did not provide clear answers. Instead, they deepened the divide. Some listeners heard signs of severe psychological distress. Others believed they heard something beyond explanation. Expert witnesses disagreed openly. Psychiatrists spoke about epilepsy, psychosis, and the effects of untreated illness. Religious figures debated doctrine, belief, and the limits of spiritual intervention. Each side presented evidence, yet no single explanation satisfied everyone. The parents insisted they had acted out of love. The priests maintained they had followed church approval and believed medical care was still being provided. No one claimed malicious intent. But intent was not the question. Neglect was. The court ultimately ruled that regardless of belief, responsibility remained. Medical treatment should have continued. Intervention should have happened long before Anneliese's body failed. The parents and priests were found guilty and given suspended sentences. For some, the verdict brought closure. For others, it changed nothing. Public reaction was deeply divided. Newspapers debated whether the trial represented justice or misunderstanding. Religious communities felt attacked. Medical professionals warned of the dangers of allowing belief to override care. And still, the recordings circulated, fueling endless discussion. Even after the trial ended, the case refused to rest. People continued to listen, to argue, to question. Was the court right to treat this as negligence alone? Or had something deeply human, fear, faith, desperation, been placed on trial as well? What the courtroom did establish was this: Anneliese Michel's suffering was real, and it happened in full view of others. The legal chapter had closed, but the mystery had not. Even today, her case is studied in classrooms, debated in religious circles, and referenced in discussions about ethics, belief, and medical duty. No verdict has ever fully explained what happened inside that room, or inside Anneliese herself. Perhaps that is why her story still unsettles us. Because whether you believe in possession or not, one truth remains impossible to ignore. A young woman asked for help, and the help she received ultimately cost her life.